All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Jessie Vitetti, Assistant Vice President of FedNow Industry Readiness and the moderator for today's session. It is great to see you all again. Thank you for joining us for our final ISO 20022 education session webinar. Today we'll focus on account reporting messages. As usual, Frank Van Driessche, Assistant Vice President of FedNow Product Management, will lead the session. You should be very familiar with Frank by now, as he has done a great job in many preceding sessions. Before we get started, let me share a few quick reminders and some logistics. If you're having difficulty with your audio, select the Switch Audio option from the Audio and Video menu at the top of your screen and enter your preferred phone number to switch your audio connection to your phone. A reminder that all attendees have been muted, but you still have the ability to submit your Q&A, your questions via the Q&A option on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll use this Q&A panel to collect questions as we go through today's presentation. We will take regular pauses for questions throughout the webinar. You can also ask questions on today's content and topics covered in previous sessions. Lastly, a reminder that if you don't have the WebEx application, you can utilize Google Chrome or Firefox as the preferred browser. We will take breaks throughout the presentation to answer as many questions as possible. And if you would like to view today's materials or feel your question was not answered, please email us at the FedNow community inbox, and we will send them to you. You can also access some great educational resources on the FedNow Explorer website. So without further ado, I will transition to Frank to begin the session. And Frank, I have to say, after this many sessions together, I'm kind of sad that this is our last one. But as I understand it, it may be a break, but we'll probably come back together for some additional ones in the future.
I hope so, and thanks, Jessie. And hi, everyone. And yes, as Jessie mentioned today, the last chapter in our FedNow Service ISO 2022 education series, at least for now. There might be a sequel, who knows. Today, we are going to discuss how we will be using the ISO 2022 messages for account reporting purposes. And let us have a look to kick off the session with what we have on agenda for the next 90 minutes. As always, we will start by giving you an overview of the messages in scope of today's session to start things off, followed by the highlights of the ISO 2022 messages that we will be covering that will underpin the account reporting through the FedNow service. We will only cover 3 messages, although if you look at that slide, you see more, what seems more, but one message, as you see, will be used for 3 different purposes. The Camp 52, and after today's session, that message will no longer have any secrets for you. We will be using that message for 3 purposes: to provide you an account balance report, to provide you an account activity totals report, and also to provide you with account activity details report. We will end the session today with a look at the account debit credit notification, the Camp 54, that will be used for correspondence. And as always, we will end with pointing out where you can find complete information on what we present today, including tools that we make available for you to start testing some of these messages. Guess what? Jessie indicated that this is, for now, the last session, so there will not be a call for action. At least there will not be any homework in prep for the next session, but we will come towards the end of the session, so stick around. Okay, let's have a look at to kick things off with of the account reporting messages. So on this slide, what you see there is, well, first of all, let's have a look what these messages are. So these are the messages that are sent by the FedNow service to FedNow participants for treasury management, for reconciliation purposes, and they can be sent either after asking the FedNow service for a report, or so solicited when the FedNow participant sends an account reporting request message, or they can be sent by the FedNow service on an unsolicited basis at the end of the day. So in the table that you see on the slide, you see the first message that we will discuss there's the account reporting request. Now you see there that this message is not solicited, nor will it be sent on an unsolicited basis, because that is actually the message that we will be using, or you will be using as FedNow participants of the future, to request account reports. But then we see that the other messages, the actual account reports, the account balance report, the account activity totals report, and the account activity details report may be solicited or will be sent on an unsolicited basis. So we see that the account balance report is solicited, is sent when solicited during the business day by the FedNow Service participant by sending that account reporting request to the FedNow Service, but it is not sent on an unsolicited basis at the end of the day. The account activity totals and account activity details reports, so the next two lines, both CAMP 52, different implementation flavor, are both sent when solicited by participants, but also are sent on an unsolicited basis at the end of the business day by the FedNow Service. And then the last one the last message that we will cover today, the account debit credit notification, cannot be solicited by participants. This is only sent on an unsolicited basis when we inform a correspondent that has opted in to receive this message that transaction of one of their respondents was booked on their account, whether credited or debited. So that is what we have on agenda for today. As always, I want to remind you that everything we will see today, that the flows of messages, the requests and the reports being sent have been captured in a document, the FedNow Service ISO 2022 message flows document that is available for your reading or for downloading on the MyStandards web portal. That document will cover the whole flow when you request reports, so the account reporting request with the account reports that are followed or delivered by the FedNow Service. It will also cover the flow of the account debit credit notification, and it will also go into the detail of the end of day reports that the FedNow Service will be sending after closure of the FedNow Service business day. So all that, what we discussed in individual sections today, has been covered in the message flows document available on MyStandards. With that, I suggest we dive into the message highlights. So talk a little bit the specifications of how we will be implementing these three ISO 2022 messages for account reporting purposes through the FedNow Service. As always, and it will be the last time, a quick refresher, everything we will see today, whether you are sending an account reporting request or whether the FedNow Service will be delivering the actual account reports, all these message flows will always be accompanied by the business application header on top of the underlying ISO 2022 message. And for your reference, the detailed explanation of the business application header was covered in our November customer credit transfer webinar that is available if you would like to revisit that. So quick refresher there, the business application header also for these messages, reporting messages, is in the picture. Let's start with the easy one. I'm not saying the others are difficult, but this is a short and sweet one. The account reporting request message. So this is the CAMP 60 message, as you see on screen there. And this is the message that you will be using to request the FedNow Service to send you a report. So the scope is indeed that it is used by FedNow Service participants to solicit an account report from the FedNow Service. The usage, you can use it as we will see, and as also the table to kick off the discussion that I showed before. You can request with this message an account balance report, an account activity details report, and an account activity totals report. If your request is accepted, meaning if your account reporting request meets our technical and business validation edits, then as a result, the FedNow Service will deliver to the FedNow participant requesting the report, the actual report, which a CAMP 52 message, which in ISO lingo is called the bank to customer account report message. We have modified the names a little bit for the different flavors. As mentioned, we will talk about the account balance report, activity totals, and activity details report. That is the flow. I mean, straightforward. In step one, when you want to solicit a report, you are going to send this CANT 60 message to the FedNow service requesting a specific report in that message. And if your request meets all our requirements, then we will deliver the report that you requested in that CANT 52 message. So straightforward flow. If everything meets our requirements. If not, then we would be sending back, not shown on this slide, but then we would be sending back the ADME 002, which was covered in our 7th session, the system messages when we reject a message for not meeting our technical validation requirements. From a specification point of view, the message is rather straightforward. It has as many of the ISO messages that we have covered so far, and today are the last, the set in scope of the FedNow Service Release 1. The message has a group header, which will only identify the account reporting request with 2 elements. Nothing special about it. You will assign a message identification to your account reporting request that has to be unique for the calendar day, and it will have a creation date time. And as you know by now, we will require that to be 24-hour clock format with an offset against UTC if you use local time or directly in the Coordinated Universal Time, UTC. So nothing special. The group header, you assign a reference that has to respect a certain format and must be unique, and you give the creation date and time of when the message is created by you as FedNow participant. The request actually comes in the second part of the message, and that will be the actual reporting request component, which is a single mandatory component where you will identify what account report you're requesting the FedNow service to send you. And these are the elements, and we will cover them one by one, that the account reporting request, the specific reporting request component will contain. First is the identification, and that actually is going to indicate where you as FedNow participant requesting the report, you will indicate what kind of report you would like to for the FedNow service to send to you. And we have created codes to streamline this process. So in the identification, you can use any of the codes that you see on the right side of the screen. You can, if you're requesting an account, and they're alphabetically ordered, if you're requesting an account activity details report, you will be using the code AADR. If you're after an account activity totals report, AADR. An account balance report, A-bar, and so on. The correspondent can also request reports. They can request the correspondent account details report with the CADR if they're after a correspondent account totals, activity totals report, CATR, and then you see the 2 codes for intraday reports. The correspondent asking for an intraday account activity totals report would use CITR, and if it's a FedNow participant asking for that same account activity totals report intraday, they will be using IATR. So these are the codes that you can use and will use depending on what report you would like to see. So that is what goes in identification. Any other code used in that element would cause a rejection by the FedNow service. So this is a restricted list of codes that can be used. The requested message name identification is very straightforward because the only message that you can request is that CANT52. I mentioned in the introduction that we have created flavors of that CANT52 message to meet the FedNow service account reporting reasons, and we have within that CANT52 defined how what a balance report will look like, or an activity totals or details. But the message, as per the ISO standard, will always be the same CANT52 message. So that is what we will be looking for in the requested message name identification. Account is then going to be used in different ways depending on the report, but pretty much the identification of the account will specify the inquiry routing number, which may be a sub-account or a master account. And the account type is what specifically for an account balance report will indicate when you're requesting an account balance report, whether you're after a master balance account balance report or a self or single routing number balance report. The account owner, that will be where we will find the requester of the report, and then the reporting period will give an indication of what you're interested in from a period point of view with a from and to date, and that is specifically for the account activity totals and details reports. So there are a couple of rules. We will not cover them all today, but important note is that on how we actually will deliver the reports depending on what your request contains. The first one important is about the account, that if you request account activity total reports or account activity detail reports, or a correspondent request this for their respondent activity, you'll see the code there on the screen, that if it is requested for all the routing numbers that might be serviced, then if successful, we will deliver individual reports, individual CAN52 messages for each of those routing numbers that are serviced. So if a correspondent asks for an account activity details report for all the respondents they service, if that request is successful, we will deliver a report for each of their individual respondents separately. We will not combine them into a single account reporting request. Same principle behind the reporting period. You can request an account activity totals or account activity details for up to 90 previous FedNow business service days. Business funds transfer days. If you would request a report for more than one business day, then we will deliver, always assuming that the request is successful, we will deliver these reports in individual CAN52 messages. So if you request for 3 days and your request is accepted, we will send you 3 separate reports for the 3 individual business days of the FedNow service. So, the account reporting request, the main pieces of information is what report are you requesting, and that will be by picking one of these codes. The second one is a default CAN52, that's the only report that so far we have enabled. The identification, which will drive the content of the report, and then who's requesting, and if it is the use case, whether you're requesting the report for multiple days or for a specific single funds transfer business day. And with that, Jesse, we've covered this message, so let's have a look whether there's any questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions for you. So actually one of them you just covered in the last part of this section that you covered, and it was a question about the date range for requesting the reports. So you just covered that up to 90 days. I have a couple of additional questions for you. Could you explain the difference between solicited and unsolicited for account activity totals and account activity detail reports?
Okay, I'll go back to slide with a table for that to go over there. I think the importance here is kind of like the little footnotes of the references there. So you see that both the account activity totals and details are sent on a solicited or may be sent on a solicited basis, but also unsolicited by FedNow Service. Now, what do we see for an account activity totals report is that you can solicit it, so ask the FedNow Service for an intraday report. So that means a report that reports all your activity totals up to a certain moment in time during that FedNow Service funds transfer business day. And at the same time, you can also solicit an account activity totals report at the end of day and for previous funds transfer business days. And referring to your question just now, this can be up to 90 days in the past. Unsolicited, at the end of the day, the FedNow Service will send the end-of-day activity totals report to all FedNow participants. You can opt out, but that's the default setting. So during the day, you can ask for an overview of the activity totals for that specific business day. You can also ask for reports of previous business days. At the end of the day, you will get an unsolicited report. You will get that activity totals report from the FedNow service for that specific day that has just been closed. Similar for an account activity details report, so the next row there, it can be solicited or it can be sent after request from a FedNow participant, or it is also sent unsolicited at the end of the business day by the FedNow service. The only difference is that the account activity details report can only be solicited, cannot be solicited for an intraday report. So you can only solicit end of day account activity details report. So for prior FedNow funds transfer business days. So you cannot ask for an overview of detailed transactions during a specific business day. That is the difference. Apart from that, also this method you can solicit for up to 90 previous business days, and you will get it for the business day that just closed at the end of the business day, delivered on an unsolicited basis by the FedNow service.
Frank, so we do have a clarification question on the 90 FedNow service business days and whether that's, you know, business days or calendar days. So the FedNow service is a 24/7, 365 service. So the 90 FedNow service business days would include weekends and holidays. Just wanted to clarify that for the member of the audience who asked. So I do have another question for you. The FedNow service will use account 52 message for all account reporting. How will a participant know what a message is reporting on?
Okay, so it's true. We will be using that CAM 52 for multiple purposes. I'm going to go back to my refresher because there's two ways on how you can identify that, and apologies for the scrolling. There's two ways on how you can know what kind of account report we're sending. First, there is the business application header, and you might remember that we have this market practice, sorry, I should show it on this screen, market practice element there that will tell you under which guideline a specific message is being sent. And the CAM 52 is actually one where we have identified multiple identifiers to tell whether an account report is an account balance report, an account activity totals, or an account activity details report. So here, I mean, this is a slide as a refresher, you don't see it, but for the CAM 52, this will say frb.fednow. And then an indicator will be used to tell you whether it's an account balance or an account activity totals or details report. A second mechanism in the message is what we just saw in the report. So, well, I got the slide right. You have these codes here in your request where you identify what kind of request this is about, or what account reporting message you're asking the FedNow service to send you. We will repeat these codes in the report that we send you. So while the CAM 52 is used for each of these, very at the beginning, on top of the message, we will tell you whether it's an account activity details report, whether it's a correspondent account activity details report, and so on. So two ways. Highest level, the business application header, you will see the flavor of the CAM 52 that's being sent. Within the message itself, up front, we will tell you with the code of what kind of report we're actually sending you.
Thanks, Frank. We have one more. So
okay.
Will a payment be reflected in the balance, transaction total, and transaction details report as of the business day closed? For example, if the payment was received by 8 p.m. on May 24, by 8 p.m. Eastern time on May 24, will it be reflected on the May 25th report?
Yes, so we will provide, depending on the use case. So I assume that somebody is saying that if a payment at 8 p.m. Laying normal closure aligned with Fedwire funds at 7 p.m. If a payment is sent and successfully processed at 8 p.m., it will indeed end up in the next report. While actually the current FedNow Service business day report. When we report on the individual transaction, you will also see when it was actually sent from a calendar date point of view. So it depends, because that will not end up in the activity totals report, but in the activity details report. We will tell you what the acceptance date time was, which is the element we use to reflect the calendar date, and then the interbank settlement date, which is when it was kind of like what the business cycle of the FedNow service was, where it was settled on the master account.
Right, but to clarify, just to make sure we're all on the same page, if the payment was received by the FedNow service at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, which is after the FedNow service cycle day rollover, which, like you said, aligns with the Fedwire funds close, that payment will be reflected as of for the next cycle date.
Yes, which is the current one at 8, because
right.
we roll over at 7. Yes.
Correct. All right. I think that for now, we're current on questions. So if you want to proceed and come back to me at the next break, that would be great.
Okay, good. Now, a little bit more detailed, the next message, the account balance report. Now, the good news is that we will see elements and components coming back in the different flavors, but this is the first one, so this might come a little bit as all new. But when we then look at the account activity totals and details report, a lot of the information that we will learn about in the account balance report will actually also be reflected in the other reports. So the account balance report, so account 52, is the message that we will use to report on the account balance entry. So we will use it to provide FedNow participants with, and it's all on screen there, with information on the debit and credit balances, transaction totals where appropriate, if you have transactions, opening balance of the FedNow service, FedNow Fund Service, the FedNow Securities Service, the National Settlement Service, pre-funded ACH, provisional posting. So all this, which by the way is also information with the exception of the FedNow Service, obviously, as that service is not yet live, that you receive in account balance reports today as, for example, Fedwire participants. So all that information will be provided in the account balance report. Now, we provide this for your reconciliation purposes. We will not send, as per the table, the account balance report on an unsolicited basis. So to obtain your current account balance information from the account balance service application, you need to send us an account reporting request, account 60, that we have just seen, and you might remember the code there being ABAR being used. An account balance report can only be solicited by FedNow participants that have a master account or sub-account, not by FedNow participants that are respondents. Respondents use settlement services, use the account of their correspondent. They cannot trigger or they cannot request an account balance report. That is up to the correspondent to request that report. The flow is very similar to the flow we saw when we looked at the CAN 60. The CAN 60 message will be sent, in this case, with the code ABAR. You're requesting an account balance report. If your request meets our requirement, meets the technical and business validation requirements, then we will deliver inflow to that account balance report, which is account 52. And as said before, you will get that same code back in that message to make sure that you understand what kind of flavor that account 52 is. So in this case, if you request an account balance report, if everything goes well, you will see upfront in that account balance report that we're sending you an ABAR account report, which is the account balance report code. Now, the account balance report, the group header, contains these elements, and this is, for example, when I said what we will see coming back in the other report. This group header is very similar, but what will change is the code that will be used in that first element there, message identification. So in the group header, we're going to be identifying the account reporting message, in this case as an account balance report, and up front that message ID will reuse that code of the request A bar. So this tells you that this CAMP52, which is used for multiple purposes, is an account balance report. The creation date time is when it was created by the FedNow Service application. Message pagination indicates the page number of the report, and I'm going to be clear that when it comes to account balance report, there will be one page. No multiple messages will be sent to report on your account balance information. That might be different in the messages that we will see later throughout this session. And then the original business query is actually the reference that we will include to your account reporting request. So the account balance report for the FedNow service is only sent on request, and in the original business query, we're going to be including a reference to that account balance report request. So the CAMP60 reference information will be returned in the delivered report. Then the actual report information in that same CAMP50. So first block, the group header. The second one is the report. This is a single mandatory component to report the account balance information. First, identification, that's going to be a default value of the code A, B, and S. That's also the case today for any report that is, any balance report, sorry, that is solicited during the day. That is referred to as an A, B, and S report. So that will not change. We will identify this account balance report as an intraday account balance report that was solicited by, in this case, the FedNow participant. The creation date time here is where we will be using that report. We will be identifying the FedNow Service funds transfer business day, which is an implementation on our side because there was no such concept as an element for that funds transfer business day. We will be using and have documented as such this report creation date time will refer to the funds transfer business day. The account that is going to specify for an account balance, first of all, in identification, the routing number used to determine the information in the report, and then the type, as in your request, will specify whether it's a master balance report or a self or single routing number account balance report. The related account, that will specify the participant's inquiry routing number. So this is going to tell you kind of like for which account and what type of report we're sending it, and of course for what FedNow funds transfer business day. Then we come to the core of this message, which is the balance information, and this will be a repetitive component to provide you the actual balance information. So let's have a look at what we find in the balance component. First of all, we're going to be specifying the balance type with one of the following codes. And there's a lot of information in there, but I'll just go over it step by step. First of all, I would like to start with this note on the bottom. The balance component is repetitive, and it will occur 2, 3, or 4 times, depending on what kind of account and account type we're reporting the balances for. So if it is an account type master, and then the balance component will occur 4 times, and I'll come back to what these 4 times are in a second. If it's a self, you will not have the 4 occurrences, you will have less. So if it's an account type master, we have 4. The first is going to be the opening balance. Now for the opening balance, you have 3 possible codes. So the first occurrence of this balance component will be for a master account balance report, will be an opening balance, and there's 3 flavors if you want. One is the opening balance prior day balance loaded. One is the opening balance final balance loaded, or one is the opening balance not loaded. So depending on the information we get from our ABS system, we might have any of these 3 codes, but one The first occurrence gives you the opening balance. The second occurrence is the daylight overdrive balance. So the second occurrence of this component, the type will be DLOD, the daylight overdraft balance. The third occurrence in a master balance report will be the account balance, and that is this type A balance. And then the fourth occurrence is the available funds balance. So this is the four for an account master. And we see that if the account type is S, so now we're reporting on a self or single routing number, and the inquiry routing number is the sub-account routing number, then you will only have it two times. The first being the daylight overdraft balance, and the second being the account balance. So if it's a self, a sub-account asking for self, they will have their daylight overdrive balance reported back and their account balance, but they will not have, for example, the opening balance reported, because that is only reported at master account. Lastly, if the account type is a single routing number, but the inquiry routing number is a master account number, then the balance component will occur three times. First occurrence is then going to be the opening balance, the second, the daylight overdraft, the third occurrence is the account balance. And note, to be complete, if the account type is self or single routing number, then all occurrences legally are not balances, but provide information regarding the transactions that were affected using that inquiry routing number. So for a self, legally, these are not balances, it's only balances at the master account level. So all this has been described in full detail in our implementation guide, but that is why the balance component is repetitive, but not necessarily will always occur the same number of times. It depends on whether it's a master account balance when you have four, or whether it's a self, and then it depends whether the master is looking at self or a self, a sub-account is looking at self, and that triggers a mechanism to define whether we report 2, 3, or max 4 times. Okay, that's a lot about the account balance report. Of course, the balance will then be given. Once you know what balance it is in each occurrence, you will see the balance amount with a credit or debit indicator, the time and the date and time related to that balance, and then the credit line. Credit lines might be provided too. So this is only, again, when we're talking about an account balance report that is a master account balance report, and when the type is the account balance or the ABAL code. In that case, you will have up to 5 occurrences of credit line related information, and they're all detailed here, what these occurrences be. The first occurrence is the net debit cap. The second occurrence is the collateralized capacity. Then the remaining occurrences then provide information on collateral available for daylight overdraft purposes and the extent to which it has been used. Important to note is that for those that are FedWire funds or have a master account and get account balance reports, all this information is available today. So this is not any change to what you receive today on how we report information today. Also today, if you're a master, your master account balance will contain 4 occurrences: opening, daylight overdraft, account balance, and available funds balance. If you're a self, you will get 2. Your account balance, the type account balance report for a master, will contain that information on your net debit cap and the collateralized capacity. So all this information is now reflected in ISO 2022 messages, but this is exactly the same data, if you want content, than what we report today. The final component is a transaction summary component in that same account balance report. And this is going to be a single mandatory component to provide the account summary information. And here we have a lot of information, but a little bit easier than the account balance itself, the balance that we just covered. Here we will identify a list of summaries for what we call a bank transaction code. So you see here total entries per bank transaction code, and we will there, through this mechanism, report you all these different account summaries. First of all, for each of these, you're going to get the total net entry. You'll have the number and sum of credit entries. You will have the number and sum of debit entries. But the important differentiator there is that this bank transaction code that will identify what summary we're providing. And then the date is going to be the calendar date and the application time on the last update to that for that specific summary. So what do we see in the transaction summary? That you will get the following summaries. You may get, let me correct, you may get the following summaries. You will get your summary for the FedNow Service, which will be identified with the SDWF code. So total entries per bank transaction code, that is repetitive, and I'll come back to it. So the first occurrence is going to give you the FedNow Fund summary. The second one is going to give you the National Settlement Service summary. The third one is going to give you FedWire Security summary. Then we're going to have the pre-funded ACH summary. All things that you have today. Other available activity, other unavailable activity, memo posting entry summary, and the new kid on the block, the account balance report provided by the FedNow Service will contain the FedNow Service overview, transaction summary of FedNow Service funds transfers. So these are the codes that will identify what kind of transaction summary is being provided. And for each of these, you'll get your total net entry, credit entries, debit entries, and the date and time of the last transaction. Now, there is a little footnote in all these reports, which it will occur 7 to 8 times. If the account type, again, here we go, is a master, you will have 8 occurrences with transaction summaries reflecting all these codes. If you're a self, so if it's an account balance self report, so S, then you will have 7 because there is no memo post summary in the self account balance report. So again, all this is captured in the message implementation guidelines in full detail with rules. But what is important for the account balance report is that there's 2 main components. One is the account balance report that will contain up to 4 times if it's a master, and 2 for a self. The second big component in that account balance report is a transaction summary overview that for a master will occur 8 times to reflect all the summaries you see on the right side of the screen, and for a self, it will occur 7 times for all these on the right, with the exception of the memo post entry. And with that, Jesse, I think we're ready for the next question.
Frank, I think the last couple of slides has a ton of information, and the long footnote you reviewed, I think, is going to cause our participants to have to think about it a little bit. So the Q&A has been quiet, but we do have one question for you on this section so far, and that is, what will the transaction summary in an account balance report show during the weekend? So
that's a good question. During the weekend, at least until further notice, these systems, FedNow will be open 24/7, 365, but these other systems will not open. So during the weekend, the transaction summary will report your FedNow transaction summary, but for the other systems, these totals will be 0 because there is no activity on a Saturday or a Sunday. There are no business days. Ignoring for a second the opening of the business day of FedNow funds for Monday, but for all these systems, they are not open during the weekend so far, so these transaction summaries will be 0.
Thank you, Frank. No other questions at this time, so come back to me in a while.
Okay, I'm sure they're going to pop up the next time I stop for questions. Account activity totals report, the same CAMP 52, and remember the business application header will show whether or will show this is an account activity totals report by that market practice identifier, and the report, as we will see in a second, will also start with an indication of what report we're actually sending. Now, the account activity totals report, as it says, totals is the message the FedNow service uses to provide the FedNow participant with a summary of value and non-value messages that were processed by the FedNow service for a given funds transfer business day and associated with the given FedNow participant. So this is a summary report with important value and non-value messages that you sent or received during the FedNow business day that we report on. Again, this is for your reconciliation purposes. We will send this report on an unsolicited basis after the close of a FedNow funds transfer business day. However, you can also solicit the account activity totals report intraday, and that for that ongoing or current FedNow funds transfer business day, but also for prior FedNow funds transfer business days, and up to, as mentioned before, up to 90 days in the past, you can solicit an account activity totals report by sending the CAMP60 to the FedNow service. Flow is captured here at both use cases. So on top, you see here where you solicit the report by sending this CAMP60 message, for example, an account activity totals report, AATR. If, always assuming the request is valid and is processed as expected, then we deliver a CAMP52 that we will identify as an account activity totals report with that same code. Now, for sake of completeness, in the graphic, we use AATR as an example. There are multiple codes that can be used. If you request an intraday account total report or a correspondent intraday total activity report, that is the code that will be reported back into the flow 2, into the actual report sending. The bottom of the slide is where we reflect the unsolicited sending by the FedNow service. So at the end, after closure of the business day, we will send all FedNow participants an account activity totals report, AATR, at the end of the business day on an unsolicited basis. So either top, you request during the business day and we deliver, or at the end, all participants get it for the business day that has just been closed. The account activity totals report, the group header is exactly the same as the balance report, with the exception that the codes are different. So this is where it becomes, my life becomes a little bit easier, and we repeat, so maybe at the end of the session it will all make sense. The group header of this CAMP52 in this case contains exactly the same elements, but the message ID now is not going to be a bar account balance report. Now it's going to tell you what kind of account activity totals report we're sending. And that, of course, will be related to the request or to the setup at the end of the day of what your status is, how you're participating. So this can be an AATR, an IATR, CATR, or a CITR. These are the two for participants and the two for correspondents. These are the codes that may be used for an intraday account activity totals report for a participant and correspondent, or an end of day account activity totals report for a participant or a correspondent, because the data, as we will see, will be slightly different. The creation date, time, message, pagination, and original business query being the reference of your account reporting request is exactly the same reasoning as we discussed with the account balance report, and will be exactly the same when next we look at the details report. So the point, the main focus in the group header is on the codes that identify what kind of flavor of the CAMP52 we're sending. Then we come to the actual report information. So the report is a single mandatory component to report the account activity totals information. And there, first in identification, we will specify whether it is an intraday report or an end of day report, and you see the two codes there. So if it's an account activity totals report intraday, so for that specific funds transfer business day, then the code IDAY will be sent. If it is a report that we send at the end of day, or a report that you solicit an end of day report, then the code will be EDAY, end of day. Creation date time, that is the funds transfer business day. The account is the routing number that was used to determine the information in the actual report. And then we have the transaction summary and that we will cover on the next slide, that will give you an overview of, or a summary overview of your FedNow Service participant activity up to a certain point in time when it's an I-day report, or for a specific business day when it's an E-day report. So the transaction summary is where you will find the following information captured on the next slide, which is very similar but different codes, as we will see, because now we're not reporting the different systems that we operate summaries. Now we're actually reporting on your activity within the FedNow service, so that the component itself works in a very similar way. The transaction summary will contain total credit entries, and these are all these are the sum, the total number, and sum of successfully processed value messages that you received as a participant, because these are credits, so the money was sent to you. Total debit entries will give you that same information, the total number and sum of successfully processed value messages that you send, if any, as a participant. And then we go back into this total entries per bank transaction codes, where we're going to have repetitions with different summaries that we will code in a way for you to understand what information we're reporting on. So within this total entries per bank transaction code, we have a number of entries and then the bank transaction code with the date, the application time for the last transaction. So what are the codes that you will find there? First, we will be using the code SEND for the non-value messages that a FedNow participant sent and that were successfully processed by the FedNow service. Received, RCVD, is the code that we will in the second iteration use to give you an overview of the non-value messages that you receive from other FedNow participants through the FedNow service. And then we have the rejected received. So these are value messages that you received by the FedNow participant, that you received as FedNow participant that eventually were rejected by the FedNow service. And then the RJTS, these are the value messages that you send as a FedNow participant and that were rejected by the FedNow service. So you get the total credit entries, the total debit entries, everything you received, value, everything you received, everything you send, value, and then you get the summaries of messages sent, non-value, non-value received, messages, value messages received that eventually were rejected, and value messages you sent that were rejected by the FedNow service. The little note here is that the total entry per bank transaction code is only present in a FedNow participant account summary, activity totals report, and not in the correspondent account activity totals report. That's here with a little asterisk. Only when you're a FedNow participant, this will be present with this information. What was sent, received, non-value, what was received, value rejected, and sent, value rejected. That information will not be available in the account activity totals report that is sent to correspondents to report on their respondents' activity. Okay, Jesse, short and sweet, the account activity totals report.
Yes, so I do have a reminder for our audience that no question is unwelcome, even the basic ones, so put them in the Q&A. And in the meantime, while others think about other questions, I have a couple, excuse me, for you. So what time will be indicated in an account activity totals report?
Okay. If I understand it well, let me go back to this slide. If I understand it well, then the question, then it depends on what kind of report is sent. So let's have a look here. The time that of the report will depend. If it's an intraday report, so account activity, I'm a participant, I've asked for an intraday account activity totals report, then the creation date time will give the time until what time transactions are reported in my summary report, because it's an activity totals report. If it's an end of day report, then it's actually whatever time it was created after closure of the system. Then it's a little bit less relevant. But a good point is an intraday account activity report. This time here, sorry, I should use the right screen. The creation date time is going to tell you this is your intraday account activity totals report up to this time. In an end of day, it's for the whole business day that has just been closed, or the previous business day if you asked for a report in the past.
All right, second question. Why are there no credit and debit entries in the account activity totals report?
There are. I think I know where the confusion might come from. Let me take that slide here and put it up completely. So there are, but we have them here. So you see in your transaction summary, in that single component, you have the first entry being your total credit entries. So that is because the ISO global standard caters for credits and debits as an account activity. So we found that at ISO level already present there, the total credit entries would give you the number and sum of successfully processed value messages received by the participant and the total debit entries. What we had to do to report on the other transactions is use this total entries per bank transaction code that offers that flexibility. And that is where we have come up with our codes for non-value sent received and rejected transactions received and sent. But the first two elements will provide that total credit and total debit entry in the account activity totals report.
Great. Frank, it seems like we are current still with questions after those two, so okay. Please continue.
Okay, let me move to the account activity details report. Very similar to the account activity totals, but obviously now you're going to get detailed transaction information on top of the information reported in your account activity totals report. So here, from a scope point of view, as I just mentioned, this provides the FedNow participant with detailed information on value and non-value messages that were processed by the FedNow service or sent and received by the FedNow participant and processed by the FedNow service for a given business day. The usage is pretty much the same. Of course, this message too is all about providing you the necessary detailed information for your reconciliation purposes. We will send the report on an unsolicited basis after close of the FedNow funds transfer business day. So that is a default, but a FedNow participant can solicit the account activity details report. However, as mentioned in the introduction, the account activity details report cannot be solicited intraday, meaning you cannot ask for an overview of detailed transactions up to a certain moment in time during that funds transfer business day. You can only solicit detailed reports for previous business days, so up to 90 days in the past. So that is the difference, that we send it at the end of the business day to all participants. You can solicit it from the FedNow service, but for final business days that are closed, the previous one or up to 90 previous business days, you cannot solicit it during the day for that specific day. You need to wait until the end of the day. And as mentioned also in the introduction, if a FedNow correspondent has multiple respondents, we do deliver this to correspondents. If they have multiple respondents and they request, so they solicit an account activity details report, then we will send them separate account activity details report for each individual respondent and for each individual business day that they have asked for the account activity details report for. So the flow, I'll start with what happens all the time this time, but again, we reflect both use cases. At the end, and I have update. I hope I can put that off for a couple of hours. Yes, apologies for that. So we see on top here, unsolicited at the end of the business day, the FedNow service will send this to all FedNow participants. So as we close the FedNow business day, we will generate the account activity details report and we'll send it to all FedNow participants and correspondents. The FedNow participant and correspondent can also solicit the report. So that is the flow 2 or 3, where they can ask the FedNow service for account activity detail reports. And if that request meets our requirements, we will deliver the requested account activity details reports. So default is that at the end of the day, you get it from the FedNow service, although you can opt out if you do not want to receive this message. Additionally, you can solicit for any previous days, and again, I think it's clear now, for up to 90 previous business days. One thing, the graphic just shows the example where a participant receives their account activity details report. If this is a correspondent, the code will be slightly different, just as much as a participant asking for an account activity details report will send the account reporting request with this code. If a correspondent sends that request, then they would be using their CADR code if they're interested in the correspondent account activity details report. The implementation, the first piece, I can go quicker and quicker, if I may. That group header is exactly the same as for the account activity totals, but the code now will indicate this specific CAN52 as either an account activity details report, which is the one for participants, or a correspondent account activity details report, which is the one that we sent for correspondents to report on their respondents' detailed transaction overview. Apart from that, the rest remains the same. The message pagination, and this is something where it could occur depending on how much activity occurred during the business day. You might get pages of messages to report all the detailed information on the individual transactions that were recorded for that specific day. And if the account activity details report was sent on request of a FedNow participant, then this original business query once again will include, the report will include a reference to your query where you ask the FedNow service to send the report. The second component, the report, is exactly the same as for the account activity details, with the exception, so it's not exactly the same, that this is only end of day. So as mentioned a couple of times now, you cannot request the report for intraday detailed information. It is only available now at end of day. So it will always contain end of day as the identification of what kind of account activity details report. Creation date, time, account, and transaction summary will be the same as the account activity totals report, but now, of course, we will have an entry for each individual transaction that was registered on the account. We will include the details that we will discuss soon. The transaction summary, again, you'll have your total credit entries. So this is very similar to what we saw in the account activity totals report. Total credit entry, so everything that was successfully processed and sent to the participant. Total debit entries, which is everything as a participant that the participant sent a value message across the FedNow service that were successfully processed. And then once again, that total entries per bank transaction code that occurs 4 times for the non-value messages sent, non-value messages received, the value received and rejected, and the value sent and rejected. So a copy-paste of what we saw in the account activity totals report is replicated in the details report. So first you get your totals overview for that business day. That's the difference maybe compared to intraday. First you get this overview, exactly the same mechanism, and then we go into the entry component. So the entry component is for each individual transaction. It is optional because maybe nothing occurred during that business day. I think that's unlikely, but it could be that there's no entries to report for a specific business day. Normally, this will be a repetitive component to provide detailed information on the individual messages that were registered. And that is where we will be providing the following piece of information for each individual message that was processed by the FedNow service. First of all, the amount. Now, this of course only applies to value messages, and you see that for non-value messages, that value will be set to 0. So for credit and debits on the account, we will provide the amount with that indicator. For the non-value messages, there will be a 0 amount because ISO requires the amount element from a global standard point of view. The status, that will depend a little bit on what kind of transaction or message we are talking about. So for the value messages that were successfully processed, the status will be booked because this was booked to the account. For the other categories, info is the code word that will be used for non-value messages that were successfully processed by the FedNow service. And then the reject code word will be used for the messages that were rejected by the FedNow service. And as you might remember from the previous slide, that is to cater for the received value messages that were rejected or the sent value messages that were rejected. These are also reported in the account activity details report. So anything value successfully processed has the status booked. Non-value successfully processed has the status info. And then we have the third category of messages either sent or received, that the value messages that were rejected will have the status rejected. Then we go to the next element, which is the bank transaction code. And there we have created the list of 6 code words, of which many we've already seen. So they of course go close together with that status. When the transaction is reported as booked, so a successfully processed value message, then the bank transaction code will either be a credit if you received the value message or a debit if you send a value message that was successfully processed. If we are reporting non-value messages that were successfully processed, info, then we will provide whether that was a non-value message sent or a non-value message received. And then for the reject status, we will report whether it was a value message received that was rejected or whether it was a value message sent that was rejected by the FedNow service. So these are the status codes and the bank transaction codes of the individual transactions that go together. A little note here is that info and reject only occur in the FedNow participants account activity details report, not in the report that is sent to correspondents. Correspondents offer their services for settlement reasons to respondents, and in their correspondent account activity details report, only the value messages that were successfully processed, meaning credit or debit, with their book status will be reported. Okay. The message name ID, so now we know what the amount was, what the status is, and what the nature, if you want, of the underlying transaction was. Then we're going to report the message name ID, which could be for a value message, a customer credit transfer. We will tell you it was a PAX 8. If it's an LMT, a liquidity management transfer, it would be PAX 9 from a value message point of view. For the non-value message, this could be a PIN 13 because it was a successfully processed request for payment, and so on and so on. We will report the references of that specific message, so the message identification, and depending on what message can be complemented with the instruction ID, the end-to-end ID, transaction ID, UETR, or payment information identification. Some of these occur in some messages, but not in others, so that is why they may be present, but not necessarily all of these will be reported. It depends on what we find in the message that we successfully processed will inform what we report back when we report on the individual transactions in the entry component. The related agent, that's an important one. That is going to specify the instructing agent. and as you know by now, that is the FedNow sender and the instructed agent of the message. And we will also report the FedNow connection party identifier of the FedNow participant to which the activity report relates. So the sender, the receiver, and the connection party identifier. The related dates, again, that depends a little bit obviously on what kind of transaction we are talking about, but it will specify the creation date time of the message. That helps with the reconciliation message. This is the message when the time when either you as participant created it or your counterparty created it. For value messages, this will be complemented with the business processing date, and it's successfully processed with the acceptance date time, which is coming back to Jesse's very first question there, the example of 8 p.m. being sent something after closure of FedWire funds, meaning we're in now the next day business, funds transfer business day of FedNow, but at 8 p.m. we would be reporting that the acceptance date time, if it was successfully processed at that time. This is where you find the 8 p.m. The actual settlement cycle is the next business day. So this is used for the calendar date, which not necessarily coincides with the actual funds transfer business day. And then additional transaction information, that is where we will be reporting for the rejected transactions, the reason codes for why these transactions were rejected. So whether it's rejected received or rejected sent, we will report the reason codes that we used in the PAX 002 message to inform you of the rejection of a value transaction that was not successfully processed but rejected by the FedNow service. So in the account activity details report, you get all the information you get in the account activity totals report, but then for each individual transaction, you get the amount, the status, what kind of transaction it was, and then some reference information that will help you in identifying the transaction if need be. The references, who was involved, were you sending, who was the counterparty receiving, or the other way around, where did you get the transaction from, the dates for that transaction, and if it is about rejected transactions, we will also report the reason why the transaction was not processed successfully. And with that, Jesse, any questions?
Couple of questions, Frank. All right, the first one, if you go back to slide 34, which is the previous slide, could you explain the use case for a transaction summarized as reject received, so value messages received that were rejected?
Okay. Yes, so this is, think of the customer credit transfer flow where a message is being sent, we process it, we deliver it to the FedNow participant who will then inform us of their intention to accept or reject that PAX 8 message. So that is a message that is delivered to the FedNow participant. Now assume that that FedNow participant receiver accepts the transaction, but in the meantime, it has timed out. As a result, what we will do is that we will abort and inform both sides of the transaction that for reason of a timeout, that transaction will not be processed end-to-end, has been rejected. So that is the use case where a transaction that you received, a value message that you received, eventually was rejected by the FedNow service, for example, for reason of a timeout. So that is the received value message rejected. It comes after you've accepted that transaction that for some reason, mainly timeout reasons I could see there, the FedNow service was rejected.
All right, and one more, and this one I think is on slide 33. Why is the transaction summary component not available in a correspondent activity totals / details report?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, Jesse.
Yeah, sorry, that was my bad. So if you look at the footnote at the bottom.
Clicking back.
Okay, if you look at the footnote at the bottom of this slide 33, so why is the transaction summary component not available in the correspondent activity totals and detail report?
Okay, it is available. the transaction summary is available with total credit and total debit entries. What is not available is the total entries per bank transaction code, because that is all non-value and rejected. So the correspondent gets an overview of everything that was credited and everything that was debited because of correspondent information, but they do not see the non-value that their respondent sent, received, or any of the transactions that were rejected value messages, that meaning did not cause entries on their master account that is used by the respondent. So they do see the transaction summary. Within that component, they do not see the total entries per bank transaction code, because that is about all messages that were either non-value or value not successfully processed.
All right, thank you for the clarification. So if you would proceed with the, I think it's the last section of the presentation before we wrap.
Okay, account debit credit notification is the last. So different number here. This is the CAMP 54 message. All the other flavors we've seen so far were CAMP 52s. And this is the message that the FedNow service will use to provide a FedNow correspondent with a real-time notification of a value message that was processed and settled on their account related to activity of their respondent. So this is the message if they decide to opt in, if they decide to sign up for the account debit credit notification. If you're a correspondent, whenever your respondent sends in value messages or receives value messages that are respectively debited or credited onto your master account, you can get a real-time notification instantly from the FedNow service about that operation that was settled on your account. So this is for correspondent reconciliation purposes, and we send it on an opt-in basis, so the correspondent needs to let us know that they are interested in this real-time message, because of course they will get the account activity details and totals report also reflecting activity by their respondents. But if they want instant notification when a respondent message calls an entry on the master account, they would be getting this account debit credit notification message. The flow is, if they have opted in, it comes from the FedNow service directly to the correspondent, the CAMP 54 with the code ADCN, account debit credit notification, if they have opted in for that message. For every transaction we settle on their account caused by respondent activity, we will inform them instantly of that entry. The group header, once again, is very similar to what we have seen so far. The only thing is now this CAMP 54 will contain the code ADCN. It's an account debit credit notification. We have the creation date time. We have the message pagination, will not be used. It will be one page. What we don't see here, obviously, is that business query. This is not a message that the correspondent can solicit. We just send this message to inform them that their account was debited or credited because of respondent activity. The notification itself will first have the identification, which is going to be a reference for the entry that we assign. The account, that's going to be the master account or sub-account, depending on what the correspondent is and who the correspondent offers respondent activity to. And then the actual entry information. So that is going to provide that detailed information on why their master or sub-account was touched, debited or credited for a respondent activity. In that entry component, we'll see very similar information than what we saw just now. They will get the amount, and this will always be an amount because this is about the credit and debit entry, so the value messages, and the status will always be booked because this is only for successfully processed value messages that we send the account debit credit notification. So you will always have the amount, you will have booked, and the bank transaction code will tell them whether it was a debit or credit, and that's opposite to what's on the slide, whether it was a credit, CRDT, or debit on their account. They will get the message name identification. They will get a references, depending on how many in that message were present, we will report these messages. And then, most important, they will get the related agent. They will get the instructing agent who sent the message and instructed agent who received the message of that value message that was settled onto their account. They will also get the respondent of the correspondent receiving the account debit credit notification. The local instrument, now this might be a long time ago, but hopefully you still remember in the PAX 8 and PAX 9, so in the customer credit transfer and in the liquidity management transfer messages, we require you to use a FedNow Service product code. Customer credit transfer for release 1, the only code available is FDNA, an account-to-account customer credit transfer, and for the liquidity management PAX 9 transfers, the code is LMT1. So this code will also be reported, and then they get the acceptance date time to indicate the calendar date time when the FedNow Service settled the message successfully, and then the interbank settlement date, which is the business day or the funds transfer business day. Again, always, if it happens after 7 before midnight, there might be the acceptance date time might be different from the interbank settlement date. Anything settled after 7 p.m. before midnight, acceptance date time will be the calendar date, and the interbank settlement date is actually the next business day that we have rolled over to. So that is the information they will get for every entry that is caused by their respondent activity, whether it's a debit, credit, the amount, what message caused it, whether it was customer transfers or liquidity operations, who was sending, who was receiving, and the respondent that caused that transaction, and then the local instrument with the acceptance date and interbank settlement date. That, Jesse, is everything I have to say about the account debit credit notification. Any questions?
All right. Let's see. So can you go back and explain a little bit the use of related agents in the debit credit notification message?
Okay, I guess this is related to that second column. Let me read it out, second comment here. So it provides the instructing agent, the FedNow participant sender. It provides the instructed agent, the FedNow receiver, and the respondent of the correspondent receiving the account debit credit notification. Now, in the normal case, either the instructing agent or the instructed agent is going to be that respondent. But to cater for the possibility where you might have a tiered correspondent relationship, so you could have actually that the transaction was caused by the respondent of a respondent of the correspondent. Okay, so in the straightforward case, I'm a correspondent and you're my respondent, and you send messages. I'm going to get the debit notification, and it's going to tell me this was instructed by Jesse, and the respondent is Jesse. If you, Jesse, are offering respondent services to Irene, who's also a person, then I, as a respondent, I'm going to be informed, for example, that this transaction was instructed by Irene, from which I do not have a relationship, but the respondent that why I'm being getting the report of this transaction is Jesse. So this is to cater for the tiered relationship. If a transaction was booked on my account by respondent of my respondent, I'm going to know which respondent I need to talk to because I might not have a relationship in the example. Irene is your respondent, and you will get that information. I will get that this was called by Irene, who is a respondent of Jesse, which is my respondent. So that is why we have also included the respondent of the correspondent. Although, again, for the regular relationship, the non-tiered correspondent-respondent relationship, I will just get that this was instructed by my respondent, or it was received by my respondent, depending on whether we're talking credit or debit.
So, Frank, we have another question that has come in, and I think it's a good clarification question as well. So will the master account always be credited or debited at the same time that the account debit and credit notification is sent? Or are there any circumstances where the credit debit to the master account will be effective at a later time than the account debit credit notification is sent?
So I would assume, I'm reflecting on the spot, but I would assume that we only send debit credit notification when we effectively settle the transaction on the account. So this is a clear process. We get the message, we settle it, meaning we debit the account, we inform the correspondent that their account has been debited. I'm not seeing an immediate use case where we would inform them of a debit prior to actually executing the debit. So I would say it will always follow instantly, obviously, the debit or credit, depending on whether they are sending, the respondents are sending or receiving, but the account debit credit notification, as per the name, is confirming that a debit took place. So the transaction has been successfully executed on the account. So I would say it will always follow the actual debit credit on our books.
Sounds good. And we're current on questions, and I'm also looking at the time, so I think the time together is coming to an end, so we should probably go and wrap up this session.
Good. We can do this in the time that is remaining. Where can you find more information? We've written all this up in our FedNow Service implementation guide, and you can find messages and use cases in the FedNow Service Readiness Portal Guide in this time chapter 9, and that is the last chapter before the appendix in those documents. You can find all the information on the account reporting messages in scope for release 1 of the FedNow Service. And if you want, there is an account reporting test portal on My Standards where you can find all the messages that we discussed today and where you can see samples, but also start testing yourself. You can test your CAN 60, how you request account reports from the FedNow service, and you can also test, download samples of what the reports that you will get from the FedNow service, what these will look like. You can find all this in our testing portal on My Standards, the readiness portal. And with that, as Jesse indicated, we are coming to the end, and I indicated in our introduction that there's no homework now, but we would ask you that a small call to action. If you do have more questions, please send us your questions to this email address that you see on screen. More important is that we have started our brainstorming on how we can provide more educational opportunities when it comes to ISO 2022. If you have suggestions for additional topics, if you have topics where you would like an even more deep dive, I always refer to the highlights, although it is quite detailed. Let us know. We are thinking of what we might do next, and keep looking out for information on further ISO 2022 training opportunities in the second part of the year, I would say. We're all going to go on a break now. With that, Jesse, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. And as our audience probably knows, we have been doing this co-hosting for a while now. We have really enjoyed it. We have really enjoyed the audience's company. So as Frank said, if you all enjoy our company as well and would like to see us again, send suggestions for topics for additional education and deep dives. So thank you so much for joining us today. As usual, we'll be sending a post-event survey, so please be on the lookout. Thank you in advance for your feedback. Also, I would like to remind you of an upcoming FedNow community event, the FedNow Community Town Hall on June 8th. So if you have not signed up yet, please do so. This event will feature a panel discussion with Federal Reserve leaders and service providers that will give you an insider's perspective on innovating and implementing instant payment products with the FedNow service. So we also have other exciting programs through the FedNow community related to instant payments fraud solutions from our FedNow community showcase service providers. So if you are a member of the FedNow community, you will receive notifications for all of these events and opportunities via email. If not, please email the FedNow community mailbox, and we'll send you the information that you'll need to join us. Again, thank you, and have a great day, and enjoy the long weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Frank.
And see you soon.